The Knicks are in a bizarre situation that is at least partly of their own making, as are the Cowboys and Jerry Jones, and the Jets fired their GM. It's Wednesday, November 20th. I'm your host, Owen Poindexter, and this is Front Office Sports Today. In today's episode, our reporter Alex Schiffer discusses why the Knicks are accusing the NBA of retaliation over something that the league hasn't even publicly acknowledged. Later, we'll be hitting some other NBA topics like the implications of the Cavs' incredible start and the 76ers' not-so-incredible start with longtime executive Scott Perry. We also have stories from the NFL, MLB, soccer, and more. Here are your top headlines. The New York Jets have committed to a full reset before the season's even over. The team fired general manager Joe Douglas less than 2 months after firing former head coach Robert Saleh. Douglas was in the final year of his 6-year contract and not expected to return for 2025 after the team's 3-8 start to the season. Seems that the Jets decided the breakup wasn't worth waiting for. Pittsburgh Pirates phenom Paul Skeens won the National League Rookie of the Year award on Monday. Skeens, who made his MLB debut less than a year after getting drafted, is only the second Pirate to win the award in MLB history. He's already seen as one of the best pitchers in the league, and his success could alter how teams approach the draft. In the American League, the New York Yankees' Luis Gil won Rookie of the Year honors. Gil's story was much the opposite of Paul Skeens. Only 2 years removed from a Tommy John surgery, Gil was considered an afterthought in Yankee spring training, but got an opportunity to fill in for Garrett Cole after he went down with injury, and he did not disappoint. Whether or not you believe the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight was real boxing, the event itself was certainly a success. Over 65 million people tuned in to watch on Netflix, and if that wasn't enough, reports came out yesterday that the fight brought in over 72,000 fans to AT&T Stadium and a whopping $18.1 million at the gate. That was the most gate money for a boxing or MMA event outside of Las Vegas in history, and the 9th highest all-time including Vegas. Netflix is certainly happy with the results, as the company's stock rose 2.8% on Monday after the fight. Washington Spirit owner Michelle Kang pledged $30 million towards the U.S. Soccer Federation's Women and Girls program. In a statement, Kang said, "Women's sports have been undervalued and overlooked for far too long. I'm committed to raising the standard of excellence in women's soccer, both on and off the pitch, by delivering the resources female athletes need to reach their full potential and surround them with the professional support they deserve." The $30 million donation will allow the Federation to double the number of youth national teams camps to 6 per year, as well as handing development opportunities to an extra 70,000 female coaches and referees. Rafael Nadal played possibly the last match of his legendary tennis career on Tuesday, losing to Botic van de Zandschulp at the Davis Cup. He finishes with 22 Grand Slams, second all-time among men to Novak Djokovic, and $135 million in career prize money. The NBA has not said they are investigating the Knicks, but the Knicks are saying that, and they aren't happy about it. The situation relates to potential conflicts of interest around the team employing Rick Brunson, who is the father of their biggest star, Jalen Brunson. My colleague Alex Schiffer has the details on this very Knicks story, and he joins us next. I'm joined now by breaking news and enterprise reporter Alex Schiffer. Welcome, Alex.
How goes it, Owen?
Goes well. It maybe goes better for me than certain members of the Knicks organization. So we've got this weird story where the Knicks may be being investigated by the league for maybe skirting around salary cap rules. First of all, just give us the basic bullet points here. What's going on?
Yeah, Jalen Brunson's dad, Rick, who played 9 years in the NBA and has worked for Knicks coach Tom Thibodeau before with the Bulls and Timberwolves, was on the Knicks staff before they signed his son. And after Jalen Brunson signed a 9-figure extension this summer, he also gave the Knicks a 9-figure discount, essentially leaving money on the table to give them some cap flexibility and ability to add other pieces. You see they traded for Karl Towns afterwards. And essentially there was a report out that the NBA was looking into whether or not promoting Rick Brunson to lead assistant was a way to get more money on that the Brunson family left on the table, kind of back in their pockets. And the SNY reporter Ian Begley, my buddy, reached out to the Knicks to see what the deal was, and the Knicks essentially accused the NBA of retaliatory harassment for previous things that James Dolan, the owner, and Adam Silver have butted heads over.
Dolan and has kind of always been something of a thorn in the league's side on a number of issues, so that makes some amount of sense. What doesn't totally make sense is how you could really, I could see the promotion's nice for his dad. I'm sure he's getting, obviously he's getting a bit more money for that, but you have to give him such a crazy number for an assistant coach. For this to be anything like, oh well, hey Jalen Brunson, we're gonna give you 20 million fewer dollars, but that's gonna come back in your dad's salary. Like, yeah, I could see him getting 20,000 more dollars, but but
Yeah,
yeah, how could we? I'm having trouble squaring that one.
yeah. I think two things are going on here. The Knicks making a much bigger deal out of it than it is, and to your point, the best figure we have is $2 million a year is puts you in the very top tier of NBA assistant salaries. Kevin Young a year ago had that for the Suns. He was considered one of the highest paid in the league, and he was around $2 million. So to your point, do the math. Jalen Brunson left over $110 million on the table for the Knicks. It's absolutely impossible for that to be made up through the salary of an assistant coach. So whether it's an Ohtani deal where the money's deferred or whatever, so I think that the idea of maybe giving him a little more than you would for a typical lead assistant is possible. But again, this is still just money that cannot be made up through the salary of one assistant coach in the modern era. Maybe there's a year where down the road assistant coaches get 5-10 million, but I don't see that anytime soon. So I think that the Knicks have kind of overblown this. And to your point, Rick Brunson's a qualified NBA assistant. He was an assistant for 5 or 6 years before joining Tom Thibodeau's staff in New York. So it's not like this guy, they're just paying him some random player's dad to be on the bench or anything. So it has been overblown both from a qualification standpoint and a quantification standpoint of the money.
The one angle I could kind of see here is if they're kind of lining him up to be an NBA head coach, like putting him in a better position to do that by giving him more responsibility and showing the Knicks and the rest of the league that he's up to the job. That just also feels like a real stretch. I mean, you'd really need that in writing for any kind of investigation to bear fruit, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I would also I think every NBA assistant coach would tell you they want to be a head coach. They're all ambitious, but I'm also a little skeptical of what Rick Brunson's head coaching stock would look like this coming offseason, just because he is coaching his son, who's the star player, and this is a chance for them to win a championship together. There are things that go beyond the opportunity to be a head coach and the money aspect that might make it more appealing to stay with the Knicks instead of going to a team that might be tanking for a few years, or you're not going to be winning for a while, or just there's some lack of draft picks, whatever it might be. At the same time, to your point, he is a qualified assistant, and he's worked with Tom Thibodeau before. He knows the system. He's very worthy of the promotion. And I think that the question is, does the NBA view this as too much to be coincidence, or is it just a timing aspect where the former associate head coach, Johnny Bryant, happened to leave for Cleveland the same summer Jalen signs an extension? I think that this is the Knicks making a bigger deal than it should, and maybe even the NBA in this case by looking into it, just of all the timing kind of lining up perfectly on a lot of these fronts.
Yeah, and I guess I could see something like, the Knicks, or like, maybe Rick Brunson had an offer from another team while the Knicks were negotiating with Jalen, and the Knicks said, somewhere in that conversation, Jalen said, well, are you going to keep my dad around? Because otherwise he's going to go take this better offer. And they said, oh, yeah, of course we're going to keep your dad around, and thank you for saving us $100 million. I could see something like that. Let's get into like how this story became a story at all. So if you could just take us through kind of, the background there.
Yeah, as I said, the SNY reporter Ian Begley was doing his job and just kind of checking with the Knicks to see what the deal was. They released this whole thing of it being harassment and retaliation for, Adam Silver and Jim Dolan butting heads recently. And there's a long recent history of that. The Knicks sued the Raptors almost a year ago to date, I want to say, that a video coordinator left for a job with the Raptors, and the Knicks accused him of stealing scouting reports and corporate knowledge and all this other stuff. And they said they wanted the case to go to trial instead of Adam Silver dealing with it, because Larry Tannenbaum, the Raptors owner, is tight with Adam Silver, and they accused him of favoritism. A judge ended up ruling in June that it has to go to Adam Silver anyway. That whole debacle led to James Dolan being the only owner to vote against WNBA expansion to Toronto in May. And James Dolan has also blasted Adam Silver for the new media rights deal in a letter to owners before they voted to approve it, saying how there's more national games, the league is taking more money, And, those national games kind of hurt his network, MSG Network, where obviously they broadcast Knicks games, and they're one of the healthier regional sports networks in the country at a time where, the Diamond bankruptcy and all that stuff is going on, and teams are going more to streaming their own stuff. And so his math was pretty far off with what the league is taking and what he thought they were taking. But anyway, there's this whole saga of Adam Silver and James Dolan butting heads. And I didn't even mention that, the New York Post has reported that James Dolan has kind of led this group of NBA owners and investors with the WNBA of trying to get some kind of return on investment, given the league hasn't made any money. It's nearly 30 years old. These owners want to see some ROI. They all got rich by understanding ROI. And he's been like the champion of them squeezing Adam Silver behind the scenes. So there's this exhaustive history. And, Owen, this was all just in the last calendar year. So, the Knicks responding that this is all retaliation for the past year seems a bit excessive. And, I would argue that the NBA has better things to deal with. I understand the NBA looking into this, given all the coincidence that this has happened with. And but I also think that this is just a total overreaction and making a mountain out of a molehill, as your parents would say when you were younger.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the NBA is retaliating, but when you lay that all out, the Knicks have a pretty good case that the Knicks are really annoying for the NBA. And like, if I was Adam Silver, maybe I would want to like be annoying back. And I mean, like, probably this should be at least looked into to be like, is there anything untoward happening here? I don't think they're going to find anything, but yeah, the case that Dolan is worth retaliating against is maybe stronger than I initially thought.
I think two things could be true. I think that the NBA is within its rights to investigate the situation. I also think the Knicks are making a bigger deal out of it than it is, but to your point, also have the expansive history to believe that it's too good to be true that they're investigating something like this. I've only covered the NBA 4 or 5 years on, but I've never heard of assistant coaching hiring being investigated as thoroughly as this one has been, which is interesting in its own right. So I see cases for both sides, but I think the Knicks have kind of made this more of a thing than it has to be.
Yeah, well, in classic Knicks fashion with that. Alex Schiffer, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Owen.
Cowboys owner Jerry Jones is telling anyone who will listen that the sky is not falling on his team, but on Sunday it literally did. Well, not the sky, but a piece of the roof of the team's AT&T Stadium came down 2 hours before the team's loss to the Texans on Sunday. Jones sought to downplay the incident, saying, quote, "There is no risk at all to anyone on the field playing once we shut the roof." The words, "once we shut the roof," are doing a lot of work there, given that a piece of metal that is something like 10 feet long and 3 feet tall by my eyeballing, falling from the height of the stadium is incredibly dangerous. Jones also sought to brush off talk that head coach Mike McCarthy has lost the team and said that he had no plans to fire him midseason. It's never a good sign when you have to make those statements in the first place, but regardless, McCarthy's hopes of returning next year are similar to the Cowboys' hopes of making the playoffs, which is to say not good. Meanwhile, the NFL might want to flex the Cowboys out of their December Monday night matchup against the 4-7 Bengals, but they can't, because that is the Simpsons game, where the game will be simulcast and animated in real time with Simpsons characters. While the league may be disappointed to have picked two of its most underperforming teams for that matchup, it's actually quite appropriate because that could plausibly be the premise for a Simpsons episode. Sticking with the NFL, Front Office Sports has learned that the league has no issue with players imitating President-elect Donald Trump when they dance. Brock Bowers, Calvin Ridley, and Zadarius Smith have all done the recognizable shimmy as an on-field celebration, as has UFC's John Jones and U.S. men's national team star Christian Pulisic. Pulisic said he just thought it was funny. The trend was likely started by the 49ers' Nick Bosa, who was fined $11,255 for wearing a Trump hat on the field after a game, which violates league policy. The NFL sees the dance as just a dance and said that networks can handle it how they want when players bust it out. After signing Paul George to play with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, the Philadelphia 76ers did not imagine themselves at the bottom of the standings. Meanwhile, the Cavs have been dominant and have some big decisions to make around how hard they want to push this year. I spoke about the implications of all that on and off the court with longtime NBA exec Scott Perry, and he joins us next. Joined now by longtime NBA exec Scott Perry. Welcome, Scott.
Great to see you, Owen. Doing fantastic today.
Great. Always great to have you on.
Yeah.
Let's start on the low end here with the 76ers. Sorry, 76ers fans. But Tyrese Maxey called out Joel Embiid. This is from an ESPN report. They're in a meeting, it's about how the team's not doing great. They're 2-11 right now. And Maxey apparently called out Embiid for always being late to stuff, always late to practices and everything else. And he said, that doesn't send you're our biggest star. It doesn't send a good sign to everyone else when you're not here. When you read this as someone who's been around any number of NBA teams, is this something where it's like, yeah, this stuff happens internally, and this one just happened to leak out, or is this more like this team's in trouble and this is another big sign of it?
Oh, and obviously this stuff happens a lot on teams, especially teams that are struggling. But what I like about, at least what I read, because having not been in the meeting, you don't know exactly the tone and how it went. But I always like when players take accountability with what's going on in the court. Look, this ball club is 2-11. There is cause for concern. I know when I sat in front offices, the concern was always anytime you got 10 games below 500, the chances of you making the playoffs become a lot less. The only fortunate thing for this team right now is that the Eastern Conference, aside from the top 2 or 3 teams, the records are all 500 or below. So there's still some time there, but Tyrese Maxey speaking up, showing some leadership, calling out, if he mentioned that Joel Embiid showing up late as the star and being the guy, I think that shows growth and leadership on Tyrese Maxey's part. In reading what I read, it sounded like Joel Embiid took it respectfully, which you want to see and want to hear. So I think this could be a healthy thing for the Sixers moving forward, because you don't want to wait to get 30 or 40 games and you're 15 games below 500 having this conversation. If that would have happened at that point, then I'd be even more concerned about what's going on there in the Sixers camp thus far. It's still a little early in the season, but I'm glad to see that the players are having some accountability amongst themselves, and there needs to be some urgency now in terms of their performance moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, the season's gone about as poorly as it could have so far. At the same time, their big three of Maxey, Embiid, and Paul George, they've all been injured for part of those 13 games. So you could, in some ways, give them a little bit of a pass of like we haven't really seen this team healthy yet. As an executive, at what point is there a point in the season where you start to evaluate? I mean, obviously, some amount of evaluations happening all the time, but when do you say let's just let this play out, and when do you say we got to do something?
Well, here's the issue with the Sixers, and I believe we discussed this before. When they put this team together, as great as the talent of a Joel Embiid is, he has a rich and long injury history. And then your big add this summer was Paul George, who has played less regular season games than Joel Embiid the last 4 or 5 years. So those guys, you've committed to that. They made that decision. So it's going to be difficult to move on from either one of these guys. You got to figure out how to make it work with what you have here now. Obviously, you weren't planning, or when I say you weren't, the Sixers weren't planning on Tyrese Maxey having an injury that extended a few weeks. This is extending a couple 2 to 3 weeks. They've got to get this group back together and figure out how they're going to maximize from moving forward. Joel Embiid, Paul George, they have to be available for a minimum of 80% of these games remaining, in my opinion, to have a chance. Because I don't know if there's anything you can do around the margins in terms of trading back in the roster players or some other players that are in your rotation to trade them out are going to make that big a difference with the Sixers this season. So they're stuck with this group. And that, again, leads to the importance, I believe, of Tyrese Maxey speaking up. I believe everybody in that locker room knows that the guys in the locker room they have now, they have to be the ones that do it in terms of getting this team into the playoffs and trying to make a run, which was the grand vision, a big plan of the front office to begin with.
Yeah, we'll see. Obviously, they have to not just be like okay the rest of the way forward. They have to
No.
really be a
Yes.
good team to like make
Yes.
the playoffs.
No.
Which the roster could be good. Let's go from the bottom of the standings to the top. So at the time of recording, the Cavs are still undefeated. They're playing the Celtics tonight. For us, the people listening to this will know how that game went. But looking at, I'm curious of your thoughts both about this like Cavs team on the court, but more like off the court. What does it mean for them to have this incredible start to the season?
Oh, and this is the biggest and most impressive story thus far in the NBA is the Cavaliers starting out 15-0. And there's credit to be passed around to so many people. But first, let me start with the new coach, Kenny Atkinson, and his staff. They have done a fantastic job of bringing some accountability to this team on both ends of the floor. What I love when I watch this group play is how they share the basketball. It doesn't matter who's going to be the leading scorer, even though you know that Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland are two high-scoring players, but they all are sharing in the glory. Whoever has it going that night, they tend to look for that guy. But making the extra pass, they're playing with much faster pace this year. I believe they're 7th in the league in terms of pace, when before they were in the bottom, last few years they had been in the bottom half. Evan Mobley has made a tremendous leap in terms of his growth and development as a young player. We're finally starting to see the full package of Evan Mobley, who I believe eventually is going to be an all-star in this league. He is very good at both ends of the floor, an extremely versatile player. I believe this is tremendous for the Cleveland area, being a smaller market team. It's awesome to see this getting attention. This game against the Celtics will be their first national televised game this season for them. So it'll be a big, exciting time for those in Cleveland. And the last thing I'll say, as I study this team, got to give a lot of credit to GM Kobe Altman, who spent this past summer extending a lot of these players that we talked about. He extended Donovan Mitchell, kept him around after making the big trade for him a couple of seasons ago, extended Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, Isaac Okoro. So he has a core base of players, and Darius Garland's there for a number of years as well. So this group is going to continue to grow together, learn together, and become a formidable team for the next few years. They're entering their window right now. They're just slightly into the luxury tax. And so what I'm going to look for going towards this trade deadline, as they continue to evaluate this season, they're off to a hot start. If they continue this hard start, this start approaching the deadline, do they look to maybe add a missing ingredient that they feel to compete for the championship this year? Or do they feel like, we're going to be really good, but let's not go into the tax this year, because they have a way, because they're just slightly into it, to get below the tax, because tax season is coming for them in subsequent years once the extensions start for both Mobley and Donovan Mitchell. So I'm watching all of that. That's the fascinating part of the business, to see how they're going to manage that. Kobe's done a good job of really studying other teams. And, I use an example. Denver and Milwaukee, two recent teams that have won championships, but have been heavily impacted by being, second apron teams, and watching those teams not have the ability to really improve their rosters anymore to make another run, or struggling to do that. Kobe's in a good financial position right now, so he's got to determine whether or not this group is going to be good enough, like Boston did. They won a title and they've re-signed everybody, and they're saying, okay, our window's now, we're going to go 3-4 years trying to win with this group we have, and not be able to do much with it. Cleveland has options as they enter into this window. So exciting times for Cavalier fans.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how they play this. Do they just try to stay right around the line, or really go for it one time? When that Nuggets team won the championship, I was like, okay, they're the team to beat. Just this offense rotates around Jokic so well, and who's going to stop this? They look so comfortable, and then they haven't been back. you've worked for, you work for the Knicks, you've worked for some smaller market teams like the Pistons. When a smaller market team is this good, like, does the league respond in some way? I mean, obviously, like, when it's like Knicks and Lakers, Celtics and Lakers, like, that's like the bonanza for them. What do they do if it's like, the Cavs in the East and the Thunder in the West are like the big teams?
Well, the Cavs and Thunder fans are extremely excited. I can tell you that much. So much is when you have this discussion, and just to be frank, deals with ratings, television ratings. And as we know, and his history has taught us, when New York teams are good, Los Angeles teams are good, even Chicago teams, Boston teams, a lot of your major media markets, when they're good, viewership tends to be up. But from a pure competitive standpoint, from a league and from being a front office person like myself, I love to see it when the small market teams rise up. Look, I worked with the Detroit Pistons for a number of years that you would consider a smaller market team. We were bigger than, let's say, the Clevelands and OKCs. We had a bigger market than them, but we weren't New York, Chicago, LA, but had a rich history, but a great sports town. And it's just tremendous what it does, not only for the morale of your city and state that you're in, but for the local economies. And that's the big impact there. And that's when these owners buy teams, especially in the smaller markets, when they can have the opportunity to put a championship caliber team on the floor, what that does for the local economies is tremendous. And so I'm happy for a place like Cleveland, Oklahoma City, who looks to be one of those teams that are going to push towards a finals appearance, whether it be this year, next, or the year after. I think it's great for competitive balance of the league. How that's going to be reflected in terms of viewership on a national and international scale, that remains to be seen. Again, history has shown us the bigger media market teams tend to draw much more. That's just a fact. But let's see where it goes. For the basketball purists, you got to love it. And especially when a team like the Cavaliers are playing the game the way they play the game in terms of sharing the basketball and defending well together. It's really fun to watch.
Yeah, and like, you got to imagine the league's happy with it, just in that, like, this is how they set it up. Like,
yes.
They could have had more of like a MLB like league where it's like the Yankees and Dodgers are in the World Series, partly because they can spend the most money.
Yeah, and you use an example when you talk about that. This is what I believe how the NFL keeps people so engaged, because the NFL, regardless of market, now that the ratings are always up because of the competitive balance of the league, and every team, pretty much every team, but say 2/3 of the league to start the season believe they have a chance to make it to a Super Bowl. And so, and they come from big or small markets. It doesn't matter. It is much watched TV for fan bases. So I think that's the challenge now for the NBA. If it is Cleveland and OKC, how does the NBA make sure this becomes much watched television for the masses, for the product? That's the challenge in front of us. But again, you made a beautiful point on that's the rules with the first and second aprons, and all that was put in place to even out the advantages a lot of times that the bigger media markets had in terms of not worrying about going into luxury taxes and all those type of things. But now that's changed, and then this is the new world we're in, and everybody's got to adjust.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll leave it there. Scott Perry, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
You're welcome, Owen.
Time now for Front Office Sports Tomorrow, where we look ahead to what's coming in the business of sports. X is launching an NFL portal that will centralize content from teams, the league, its media partners, related accounts such as SNF on NBC, and reporters from outlets like NFL Media and ESPN. We have seen streaming services use sports as a way to get large audiences watching the same thing at the same time. Now, with growing competition from Blue Sky and Threads, that same fight for sports audiences is coming to social media. That's it for today. If you're enjoying the show, let us know on X, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, YouTube, or anywhere else. Thanks for listening. We'll see you tomorrow.